podcaster, entertainer, philosopher, comedian, Mike Usenick. Usenick Unleashed.
So aren't time zones a pain in the ass, huh?
Tell me about it, man.
How you been, brother?
I've been good, mate. How have you been?
I've been fantastic. I see you've been working on music and doing shows and stuff. I'm proud of you for your continued success since last time.
Uh, yeah, I think it's been about 2 years since we last caught up in a format like this.
Yes.
And chat.
Let's not wait that long next time. It was always
I agree.
it's
No,
always
far too much has happened.
right. Well, let's get started. What has happened?
It's been a lot. I think when I last spoke to you, I think I was recording Jimmy Maddon 2, so that came out, the second full-length feature record. That did really well. We were chasing a sound at the time, that sort of Lou Reed and Stones Exile and Mainstream. It was meant to be raw. It was meant to be a bit rough around the edges. Some people got it. I thought it was brilliant, and some people thought it was woeful because it was deliberately not as polished as most recordings these days are.
It's rock and roll, dude.
Exactly, we was recording like a basement studio in like December, like middle of winter, so it was like snowing outside. With just a shot of whiskey and let's do the vocal take and like smoke cigarettes and everything in there. So we had that sort of embodiment of rock and roll. And so we're going for that sound deliberately. And as I said, for some people, they some of the press were like, brilliant, it's a heart back to rock and roll of yesteryear. And as I said, for some people, they were like, is it demos and stuff like that? So it was a niche I wanted to scratch. And then my sort of long time musical sort of producer and sort of director or collaborator in Corrie, she's had me back down her studio, and we've done a couple of numbers there, like You Don't Dance Do You, which sort of still resonates with people even after all this time. Baby Be Mine, You're Only One Dance Away, and Take You Home as well, which was meant to be the great hit, the breakthrough hit, but I'm still waiting on that one.
It doesn't. The thing is a lot of the times, though, is what you think the hit's going to be isn't the hit. And it's weird how that works. And
Mm.
when it comes to mainstream, like, I don't know if you call it media or what, but when it comes to the mainstream opinion on music, it's never right according to the mass majority, is it? Because Black Sabbath, for instance, their debut album was, a lot of the critics hated it. A lot of critics hated their debut album, but it's a cult classic. So you can't really listen to them when it comes to that kind of thing half the time.
Exactly, I think Queen's first two records were called a sort of Led Zeppelin rip-off. I mean, it's funny, I think I said this before last time, that, sort of, I can write a song and it's mine when I write it.
Mhm.
It's mine when I'm in the studio to some degree, because the studio has a life of its own, and songs develop and take off in a way that you wouldn't expect once you get into that environment. But once it's released, it's no longer my song. It's, I don't choose what sells, what doesn't sell, what people love. It very much becomes the people's song, really, at that point. So, for mine, like, in terms of trying to know what will sell, it's impossible to know. The ones you think will do well are always ones that don't, and the ones that you think won't are the ones that take off. So really, I think the key to a hit is probably to not trust yourself.
Well, I think we might have mentioned this before, but in the words of Rick Rubin, the audience should come last, because at the end of the day, if you're enjoying yourself and you're writing what you enjoy, who cares? Because you cannot decide what sells and what doesn't. That's the audience.
Exactly, and there's like, across the two records and some singles that come out, there's sort of fun songs that are for me, like she's done it all before as a sort of bouncy, sort of vaudeville-ish sort of thing, and very tongue was very firmly in my cheek with that one. And like, the Lovers Waltz and stuff like that, and Love Symphony. They're ones that I've gone I want to do, and they're hard to do as singles because they're very much, like if I want to do like a house song or a techno track or something like that. Obviously it's not a single, but it's something I can do. So albums are great for that. You can drop in these little things that you want to do and have fun with, because as much as I like, that big global hit, the fear is that I'll probably try and go back to that well and try and write that again. So I sort of tend to, if I'm doing singles, I tend to do two at a time. So even if one did well, I've got something else that's different, ready to go. I think the best example, the last two, Baby Be Mine was very much a sort of 1960s, 70s sort of ballad, along the lines of what you might expect Elvis to have done in his later years. And then it was followed by You Only One Dance Away, which is very 80s synth based sort of, new wave sort of, you expect sort of, um, Flock of Seagulls or something to sort of release it. So, it's one of those, the two completely contrasting things, but I've always tried to do it that way. And I think people probably expect not the same thing a second time,
See, that's what
which
I
which is
love.
nice. So I guess Bowie's, influence in terms of keeping guessing as to what genre will come next.
That's the thing. A lot of people will say, like, for certain artists, like, oh, they're a ripoff of this band, or they're a ripoff. At the end of the day, and I've been guilty of that when I was younger, making those statements. But at the end of the day, I don't think anybody's really a ripoff of anyone. It's influence. It's who you're influenced by. We all have an influence. We,
Yeah, and very early, like early doors in my career, a lot of people would. I wasn't a big. I like Bowie and I the visual of Bowie and everything, but I can't say that I was a Bowie fanatic in the early days. I sort of came around to Bowie a little bit. I think, but it was probably a bit too trendy at the time because everyone said it. But so many people would say, "Oh, you must be a massive Bowie fan. There's a lot of Bowie in here." And I would think, I don't really listen to him, but okay. And then more I now have got myself deeply into the Bowie world, that I realized that all the other bands that I listened to had his influence. So it was a sort of third hand influence, in terms of the music that I was listening to at the time, had connotations from Bowie, So um, I've always said I'm a shit Queen tribute act, in many ways. Like this
even the stylization. This is out of love. Even the stylization of your name is very
Yeah,
Queen.
yeah, and that was very much a deliberate. I call it a homage, but Brian might say something different in the courtroom. But that they still to this day are the musical bible, in everything that I do. But to try and copy the Queen sound is not only labor intensive in the studio, but it takes a lot of thinking. And reality is I'll never probably get to that sound. It's the thing about music. Like as a guitarist as well, my my sound on the guitar is very unique, and I used to be very annoyed by it. I was young and probably too vocally. To be fair, I used to be very annoyed that I had this sound with the guitar and that I couldn't get other sounds.
Mhm.
So I'd start playing through other rigs, different amps, different guitars, different pedals, and it still sounded like me. And I think, at the end of the day, I can never recreate that sound if I got my own. And I certainly
Mhm.
think if you listen to my records, probably, okay, I almost sort of sound like a knobhead, but you know what I mean? It certainly stands alone in its sound. I don't think there's very many other people that are doing the tones or the vocal inflections and stuff that I'm doing. So um, hopefully that can only mean good things.
Well, yeah, dude, because at the end of the day, and I know we all have our own insecurities or things that we wish, like we wish we could play like this or play like that. But at the end of the day, we should embrace our individuality. We're all different. We can practice and try to emulate somebody else's sound, but we also have to have our own. With you, I know you say that you're like a Queen knockoff, whatever, but vocally you're not. Musically and lyrically, there is some influence there, but vocally you're your own thing. You're like a mixture of like Lou Reed and Bowie.
Yeah, you know, it's that great quote by the Rocker Bob from Charlie Mason Radio that I still, it's quite an old quote now, but I still hold that quite dear to me. Vocally, it's a hard one because my formative years in music were very Johnny Cash driven.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I was spent 14 to 16 only listening to sort of really Johnny Cash, and I was clipping my hair back and, you know, trying to talk down like deep like this. And, you know, it's so what influence maybe that had in terms of trying to do something that wasn't me had on it. And you know, I'm completely self-taught in everything, and I've always acknowledged, you know, I'm not probably the greatest, you know, certainly not the greatest guitarist or singer out there, but I work hard at things. I've always tried to embrace the imperfections, so I'm not going to sing like a certain person, but what can I do with what I'm doing? But the tone of my voice is something I've probably never really know where that particularly came from. And I just hope that, as I said, other people tend to. It's always been a love-hate thing. You either love what I do or you don't, which I think the great artists probably have. You know, I mean, they're different. You either love them or you don't. I'd hate to do a middle of the road record or sing something safe.
I think at the end of the day, I don't think people necessarily hate the artist. They hate the way they perform their own music because there's a lot of people I know that can't stand like Bob Dylan, but when other people do Bob Dylan, it's great to them because they love him lyrically. They just don't like his voice. And I think it all comes to that because you don't have to be a great singer to be a great musician.
Yeah.
You don't even have to be an amazing guitarist to be a great musician. You have to mix your talents together to create your own art that is good for you. And I think you do that perfectly. You're not the best singer out there like you said, but you use your voice in a unique way which makes you one of the best underground singers. And that's what would make people great. Isn't the fact that they are great by standards, they're great by their own standards, if that makes sense, in my opinion.
Yeah, and maybe something comes down to it and being sort of self-trained. You know, I think there's a great I think it's really brilliant guitarists, for example, technically brilliant and can play like some of the best, but they don't have a sound, they have a feel that, you know, because they're overtrained.
Mhm.
Perhaps in not being trained, I have to sort of acknowledge and you know, I find it my own way, which probably gives everything a bit more of a voice. I think particularly with guitarists, you know, that they can play these amazing things and, you know, but they're not the guitar doesn't sing really. You know,
Mhm.
you can admire from a technical point of view, but I'd rather see someone who makes a mistake um, and work with it than someone who will never make a mistake, but it's a rigid performance.
Mhm. And the thing is, though, with rock and roll, especially, is there is a very interesting art when it comes to playing really well and versatile, but also sounding kind of sloppy at the same time, but like
Mm,
a well rounded sloppy, if that makes sense. Like, for instance, the Rolling Stones.
yeah,
Keith Richards, amazing guitarist. He plays great every night. He plays every note every night, but he has that raw sound that is kind of sloppy, but very like perfected, if that makes sense.
yeah,
Like, like it's
yeah. I think the best at that was probably Mark Bolan. You know,
Mhm.
um, you're right. There's a sort of you can it's one sort of conundrum I have with recording nowadays, you know, and particularly the studios recording, is the expectation now of music is that everything is absolutely spot on and perfect, you know. And sometimes you just want that slight variance, you know, you don't want to be exactly right because it gives more character to everything. And particularly with, you know, I put a lot of like live videos up and you know, my photographer and stuff, Joey, you know, you shared it the other day,
Mhm.
these live recordings with the acoustic takes. Now, if you do that properly, you're probably recording either to a click that you've done the acoustic thing in the studio, or you're individually miking everything, and then you're mixing it, you take it to a studio, you tune it up, you time it up and everything, and the video may not even be from the audio that was captured. And I just don't like that, because it's such an unfair expectation. And I think a lot of musicians now watch someone go and do an acoustic performance, or KXPL has uploaded an acoustic thing from the studio, but it's been processed and it's been mixed and it's been mastered, and it's not a live and raw thing. So when I put these things up, I think this is what you come and see me live, this is what you're gonna get. You're gonna get this sound, and okay, there might be the odd wrong note, but do I have the right feeling and everything? And I'm very much a perfectionist in many ways. Like, there's a couple of songs we tried to do, I just couldn't get the right sound. I wasn't happy with it. But when you've done a good take, and usually that's the first. And if you keep going over it and over it, particularly with recording aspects these days, you know, you can get to, but where do you stop? What is the perfect performance? Which is why I think something like, when you do like the comedy and stuff that you're doing, that yours is entirely one take. For
And
the
it's
most part.
and it's raw and different every night.
Exactly, and that's the thing about music; it has to be different. I think I said this last time, and I do like the band, and they are from Sheffield as well. But the Arctic Monkeys, when you watch, I'll never pay to see them live, because whilst it's impressive they can play everything exactly like the record, it's a live show, it's a live expression. You want to see variances, you want to see change. So every time I play, something will be different, whether I intend to or not. Sometimes another question. But I think you always feel better for the one take. If you did your comedy set 3 times to the same audience, it wouldn't resonate the same way the third time. And every crowd's different, as you know. Some jokes land with people one night and they don't the other. And that's what I love about live gigging and playing live, is one night, a slow ballad like A Night with Stilettos may shut the room up and grab everyone's attention. And on other nights, you're losing the crowd because it's too slow, then they're engaging to the faster stuff. So it's a great song of mine. Keep that in set list really for that, because it's a midway point. It's a good idea to know how the room's responding. But it's not, you can't pick a crowd. Even the ones who come to see you can't pick the mood that they're in.
Well, I heard a interesting quote from legendary George Carlin, a stand-up comedian. You've more than likely heard of him.
Yeah.
He said, if you go out, all right, and you do a show, let's say on a Thursday, and you're killing it, and the crowd's awesome, then you go to a different city and you do the same set, but the crowd doesn't like it, then it's not your fault. The audience's fault, because your art landed once. So it is the audience. It wasn't the right audience for you. So you shouldn't beat yourself up because that audience isn't your audience. Not every audience will be your audience.
Yeah.
So go to the next city with that same mindset. And if it lands again, then you found your audience again. And that's how all art should be viewed. Yes, you should in some way be like, hey, what did I do wrong? And accept constructive criticism. But if the criticism isn't constructive, it's just they didn't like you, then just move on, because you will find the right crowd. There's been many times where I've done comedy, and you probably had the same thing with music, where they're like, oh, I didn't like that you said this, or you sung this, or you constantly talk about this. Well, then I'm not for you. That's not constructive criticism. Constructive criticism is, well, you probably could have added this, or you could have changed it this way for it to work. To completely break down somebody's character is not constructive criticism.
Yeah, and I think when I was younger, I was probably worse for that. I would come off stage and I'll get in the car, and I'll think, what didn't work? Why did that not work? Why is this song not landing? You know, and then it took me a while, of just going, okay, you have a bad show. I run on a rule of 1 out of 5. That of 5 shows, 3 will just be good shows. You hit everything right. You're happy with it. It goes down well. 1's a bad show where you can't get the crowd. The string snaps. The set list changes, gone late, or something happens. And then one show is one of those magic shows, as you know, where they're eating out the palm of your hand and you could go on for hours,
Mhm.
you know. And I sort of start to establish that rule of it's the 5 show blocks, you know. Try and get your bad one out the way early, because it's going to happen. There are going to be shows you're going to forget the words. You know, the songs I've played for 10, 12 years that I forget the words to every now and then because it happens, you know. And there's shows where it's a great show and I just hit a high note that I didn't hit the night beforehand, and the rest are just your gigs. You know, it probably goes down to any sort of live performance really, out of 5, whether it's a small back room, you know, in a pub, or whether it's a proper stage. You can't pick it and you can't know until you get
Mhm.
on, until you probably takes 2 or 3. And I don't know about you, with like, you know, sort of jokes first, but I reckon it's about 2 or 3 songs before you start to feel, you know, what they're doing. And the first sort of 2 or 3 songs, you know, so sort of leaving Deaf, Blind and Wanting More, so it's real hard and fast and aggressive songs, and that sort of slow it down a bit. So for the first couple of numbers, I'm just getting into the swing of it myself. You know, I'm not
Mhm.
really taking too much note because you're just making sure, how much stage room do I have? You know, is the fallbacks the right level? You know, are they clapping and stuff like that? And sort of letting your eyes adjust to the lights as well a little bit. Um, So it's certainly not, it's not a science. And to kind of go back to what we were saying before about like young musicians and watching these perfect takes, you know, if you go and watch Queen live at Wembley, the video might be from the night beforehand and
Mhm.
stuff like that. And it's being cleaned up. So you watch that and go, my God. And they were an incredibly great band. But you weren't, we don't know because our technology was different. We don't know how they sounded actually on the night and in that moment with that song.
Mhm.
Um, and when you watch these acoustic musicians and takes, I say to people like young musicians, don't uphold yourself to that standard. You know, uphold yourself to your standard, the live standard, people around you.
Mhm.
You know, if you're playing a set or a festival, hope that the band before you is no good. You look better. But also, if you know, I've gone on before after just amazing musicians who just blow it out the water. Then you gotta think, okay, that's their thing. Now, what's mine? You know, and what can I do now to get them into what I'm doing? Because you said every crowd is, uh, every show can be a nightmare at times. You
Mhm.
know, but that's what I love about being on stages. You just don't know what will happen. You know.
By the way, if you hear whining and howling in the background, my parents just got a dog and he has separation anxiety, so he's fine. Um,
That's
but you said that forgetting lyrics, forgetting jokes and stuff is a bit of a hassle. But what's crazy to think is you shouldn't really stress over it too much because even the greats have lyric sheets. They have teleprompters that they work with. When I went and saw Ozzy, and I also saw, I think it was Judas Priest, they were using teleprompters. And
yeah,
I heard people saying, "Oh, how dare they?" I'm like, would you rather, because if they forgot the lyrics, you'd make fun of them. But since they have a teleprompter, you're making fun of them. At least they're performing. They're
yeah.
giving you a performance and trying their best.
Oh yeah, and I think part of me is like, forget the words and let it go. But I think when you sing a band like that, there's an expectation.
Yes.
Sometimes it's fun when you forget a word because you do something that you wouldn't normally do. Well, you know what I mean, you have to, and you learn that skill as you go along. You know, but there's certainly been shows where I've had to jump to a different chord because I've forgotten, or make up a new um, verse as I go on the fly. You know, sometimes those verses stay. So sometimes that's really nice in terms of you just go, okay, well, for the next sort of 10 seconds, I don't know what's going to happen. You know, as long as you don't stop, I think, you know, that's the worst thing that you can do,
Mhm.
um, you know, is stop, really. I think unless it's probably the first chord or note. But once you get into a song, you sort of go into muscle memory, really. Once you get, you know, and you probably know once you get on stage, it's very hard to describe that you're sort of there, but you're not present. You're kind of thinking of other things, really, and letting it happen,
Mhm.
um, sort of thing. So, yeah, it's the thrills and the joys of playing live that you don't get in the studio.
That's pretty much how you should handle life in general. Just go with the flow and let it happen. Just keep going. And if it ends up being a complete shit performance, at least you kept going. At least you didn't give up. I mean, shit. Like,
Exactly. If you know, if everyone gave up after one bad performance, I don't think people would get very far. But it's the certainly it's the job of love, really. As you know, you keep going because you know those nights we want to throw the towel in and go, it's shit, I'm shit, guitar shit. You know, sleep on it for a bit, and the next day you'll be right. Okay, let's go.
yeah, let's fuck today in the mouth.
Yeah.
So, since you released an album somewhat recently, are you working on the next one? Are you always working on the next one, or do you take little breaks?
Not intentionally. So I've got I had a big collection of material from sort of this time last year. I went on a bit of a writing spree, and there's an album sort of formulated and sort of written down in terms of how it would look. And the plan is to sort of probably start on that soon. We were starting on a third album at one point about a year ago, and then sort of got shelved for a bit. So I'll sort of try and pick that back up. But I find, and I don't know how you find with this with comedy, but songwriting is, to me, something that I can lose at any time, and I have to treat it like that.
Mhm.
And I have bursts of inspiration where I'll write, the floodgates will open, and for 6 weeks, I'll write, you know, 50 songs, 20 of which are good, 30 are just, you know, things that you crack out with, and 10 you go, okay, there's something here, and there's probably, you know, two or three singles. But then I can go months without writing, and I found very recently I was in this great writer's block. Every time I almost wasn't playing the guitar. I didn't really want to play the guitar. Every time I picked it up, I was just going to the same chord structures and the same melodies, and I couldn't find any words. So I knew I needed to change it up. I sort of run dry with the guitar for all these years, you know. I could hear things in my head, but I couldn't find them. And I ended up getting a keyboard, like a little sort of MIDI keyboard thing that, you know, you can create and stuff. And out of that, I'm not a great piano player, but, you know, I sort of can do enough to walk around. And out of that, and I'm not really knowing what I'm doing, I was finding chords I wouldn't go looking for.
Mhm.
And all of a sudden, I was like, right. And I was starting to write full songs, lyrics and stuff from the piano. And since being back on the guitar, I've got my love back for the guitar, and are now writing pretty much every time I pick it up. You know, the great key is to remember then, you know, what you've written. But certainly, um, I don't know if it was just a shot in the arm that I needed, you know, or what. But I think I needed to change it up and mix up probably the environment where I was writing.
Mhm.
And there's no real reason for it, you know. Um, Arguably, you know, maybe it's another one being very happy and settled in life. There's not that chaos that, you know, I'm used to. But also, I think sometimes, you know, you just need to look into other places. And mine was a piano.
See, you had made a good point previously. I get writer's block all the time, and I get in my head. I'm like, how am I going to make this thing? Because I got this idea, I have this structure, but I always have issues finding the punchline or finding out how to make it funny without the joke being really short. And then I quit looking at it as a joke because it's a common misconception in the world where comedians have to be funny on stage 24/7, and that's not the comedian's job. That was not the original concept of a comedian. Comedy dates back to like King and Queen days, the jesters. Their job was literally to make you think in a satirical way. Their job was to expose the hierarchy. Their job was to expose life and pretty much make you think. You're either going to hate them, laugh, or love them. There is three choices. So, like, it's not like with George Carlin, for instance, or Richard Pryor. They wouldn't make you laugh all the time. There was
Mm.
moments in their show where like 30, 40 minutes is just like you're thinking about how fucked up the world is, and they're basically philosophers at that point. They're not just comedians. We need to get out of that mindset, similar to musicians. Mine and your job is very similar, just I don't have music behind me. Our job is to speak our minds, speak our feelings, and make the audience think and capture the audience. It's not just to make them laugh. It's not just to make them cry. It's not just to make them, it's everything. It's an array of everything. It's entertainment. If you leave mad at me, I made you think. If I make you leave applauding, I made you applaud. If I make you leave laughing, I made you laugh. Regardless, I got a fucking reaction out of you. It's my job, regardless. Like, whether you're offended, whether you're mad, whether I made you think, oh, he probably shouldn't have said that, it's still a reaction. And at the end of the day, when I'm on that stage, am I speaking my mind? Sure. Am I being serious? No. Because my job is to get into your head and make you think whatever the fuck you want to think, and however you want to interpret what I said.
Oh, and I think music's the same. That
Mhm.
I've always said that music is the soundtrack to your life. You know, there's songs that I remember now because it happened a certain time 15 years ago, driving over a bridge, and it came on the radio. And when I hear it now, it takes me back there. You know, and everything like that. You know, so you're not going to hit the ball out the park with every record,
Mm-hmm.
but it may resonate for someone in a certain way, and that's kind of what you're looking for. Really, is you want someone to hear, you know, a song of mine and go, oh, that either relates to me, or I remember hearing it here for a reason. And usually it's lyrically based, you know, but um, sometimes it's just the song captures a moment in life, really. You know, I think that's what's great about records and stuff like that, more so.
Isn't it weird how, and in this conversation, I'm starting to, well, I've known this, but I'm starting to realize more. Our own personal ego ruins a lot of art, and it makes us view ourselves in a way that is weird, because our own interpretation or thought of ourselves isn't the thought of other people, and a vast majority. Because if you look at some of the best artists out there, they had depression. They didn't view themselves very positively, but the world loved
Yeah.
them. Well, not the world, but like they had huge fan bases. Like Robin Williams, great example.
Yeah.
The world loved him, but he didn't love himself. And it's quite a tragedy.
Yeah, I think it's probably a plight of an artist, you know, in many ways, that one, in any art form, you're pouring your heart out in something. So with me, with lyrics, you know, things that I write are very usually very personal. Some songs, you know, I are not as much, but you know, might be something someone else has said that's made me think and write. But you know, it's probably always a part of me within every song, irrespective. Um, you know, and I think with when you put yourself out there, when you go, I wrote this, something that happened to me,
Mm-hmm.
you're never going to love it because it's never going to be perfect. You know, in the studio now, I could go back to Jimmy Maddon 1, and there's still things now I'll change, and there's things I'd change. Even if it's just in the mix, you're never going to be happy with us. Even if it sounds, you think I should have done this, or I should have. I think that's why a lot of bands now are releasing remixes of things, you know, at the moment, because they've got their control to do it how they originally heard it. But I think when you, obviously, with lyrics and stuff you're putting out there, it's either people are going to love it or laugh at it, and that's probably not true, but that's probably how you think about it,
Mm-hmm.
you know. So I think you're probably never happy because you're always, every night, you're one throwing yourself back into it or taking yourself back there. You know, songs that I wrote when I was 18, 19, you know, about girls probably broke my heart then. Obviously, have no relation to me now, but when you get on stage, you do sort of go back and be like, oh yeah, that's right, and that moment, which probably helps bring a bit of um, emotion to the performance.
Mm-hmm.
But when you're doing that every night, it's you know, it can be tiring sometimes. You know, just to be like, oh yeah, that was pretty shit, that, you know. And here I am at, you know, 10 years on, still singing it. You know what I mean? Because certain songs don't really leave the set list for whatever reason. You know, despite all the hundreds I've probably written. You know what I mean? Some don't work live, and some you just sort of hold on to
What's
because they
crazy
resonate
is
with other people.
you mentioned how, like, you have what, 2 albums now?
Full albums, yeah.
you have two full albums and you're like, oh, well, this I could have changed in the first album and stuff. Could you imagine how musicians like Frank Zappa felt? They have like 60 something albums. I'm pretty sure
Yeah.
there's some music he regrets. Like,
Oh, and you look at on the flip side, Prince, when he died, there was something about 50 albums fully mixed, mastered, and written that he just said he didn't want to put out and refused to. He used to give songs out for fun. He was such a prolific writer,
yeah, like
So
Nothing Compares to You. That was one that
yeah,
he gave out.
yeah. And there's another. I think I have a feeling "Walk Like an Egyptian" might have been written by him, but someone no doubt will watch this and correct me on that. Um, but yeah, it's funny. I think you're always, no matter how much you write, you're always going to go back and be like, I should have, I should have changed that, or that's a bit low in the mix, and I wish I'd brought that up. But in a way, you leave it for better minds. But then you also think, well, maybe it would have done better if that was, that was done a certain way.
So, sorry, I was listening to you, but I was also looking you up real quick.
Yeah.
The songwriter for Walk Like an Egyptian was Liam Sternberg. He wrote it for the Bengals.
Right. Then there was another one. There's another famous one Prince certainly gave away. Well, that save everyone writing into me, unless they stopped at that moment to get on Google. But yeah, I think songwriting. I don't like the idea of giving away my songs. Probably the same way comedians probably feel a bit more about it. You know what I mean? But I don't know. My songs are very much. They're like a baby. You create them and you nurture them up and they grow. Someone covering a song I think would be quite lovely. And there was a band out of Leeds who did like a cover, or one of the members of the band did a cover of one of my tracks, and it was brilliant. It was really clever. It was much more because obviously that's very synth based in the 80s, and it was much more rock and roll. And I remember thinking, I was like, okay, he's actually done something that's really good. That it took a different way that I never thought to take the song. But I don't know if I could give up one of my songs. Not very easily. Not one of the ones I really care about. Anyway.
See, I haven't really given up stories or jokes because they're kind of personal. However, I have like in conversation, somebody brought up something that happened to them, and I shaped it, molded it, and it became their joke. Like it was
Yeah.
something that happened to them, but we made it into a joke. For instance, a friend of mine was talking about how he was in Pittsburgh and there was this homeless guy, and he was charging people $5 for him to spit up in the air and catch it in his mouth.
Right.
And he wanted to like have it like be like a really perverse joke where he like spit it up and he caught it in his butthole and all kinds of crazy shit. And I'm like, well, I would offer him to create an OnlyFans, but OnlyFans is not allowed in the public library. And he's like, how the fuck do you know? I'm like, don't ask. Don't ask questions you don't have answers to.
Yeah. No. It's probably more so a comedy. I mean, first there's a great comment about all rock stars want to be comedians, all comedians want to be rock stars, and I think that is very much true. I look at stuff that you do and think, you know what I mean? That there's, no guitar, none of the nonsense. I just get to be there.
Yeah.
But with my songwriting anyway, so much of it is things that you see or happen to you. And comedy is like that. You see something, you must think, and there's a way that comedians' minds think to be like, how do I, word this in such a way? But so much of what we do is what's seen out in the band. I say to everyone, don't tell me don't tell a sad story to a musician. They will make a song out of it.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a song that the one that you shared, actually, this isn't a metaphor, that's not been released yet, but my fiance's sister was breaking up with her boyfriend. I'm going through the process of breaking up with her boyfriend, and she said something. It wasn't this isn't a metaphor, but she said something, and I remember being like, okay. Talked to her about it and sort of scribbled that down like a bag for a cigarette packet or something, something, and was sort of sketched out a verse. And I sat on it for a while. I kind of didn't think much more of it other than I really liked it, what she said. And there was a moment to it. I was playing the guitar and I had a set of chords, and I thought, what will go well with this? And you're flicking back through the pages of your book that you scribble shit into, like the 2 a.m. phone notes that you never go back to. And found the song, and then the whole thing just came out there. know, and as I, would say to people when I played it live, I'd say that song, and then go, and then be careful what you say to a musician, because that becomes a hit, and all of a sudden you have this constant reminder, sort of thing. So I always say, be very careful to musicians what you say, particularly songwriters or comedians, because you never know what, you never know what can inspire someone else.
Everyone wants to date a musician or a comedian until it comes to the breakup, and then that's the crazy part. But what was the song you wanted to tell a story about? You messaged me last night, and I forget
Yes.
which one.
No, so I was thinking about this on songwriting because I knew we had this coming up. There's a song, I don't think it's been on an album, it's not been on an album yet, called Lady Discover.
Mm-hmm.
And this song dates back to when I was about 21 or 22, I think. I might be in a fraction younger. And I was at a house party. This sort of shows some songs about breakups and very personal. And like the real me is, I don't really like playing it because it's sort of very lyrically raw. And always has been. It's still one I go back to when I hear it. But Lady Discover, on the flip side, well, at house party we've been drinking as you do at 21, and somehow I never quite remember how we got to the conversation of can prostitutes or late at night fall in love with clients, particularly ones maybe come back a lot, and could you have this weird dynamic? I don't know, obviously, how we got to the conversation. It's 21-year-old lads for you in a way, but what we did, we want to know the answer. So we called up a brothel, and we said we want to speak to one of the girls, and we just want to know, do they fall in love, or do they fall feelings, catch emotions, maybe from someone who's been there for a bit, Anyway, so we're trying to have this conversation. We're absolutely wankered at this point. I mean, it's probably 2 a.m. And we're trying to ring someone. Anyway, I remember my mate's mum come around the corner and be like, "What the on earth are you two trying to do?" Because we're on the phone and we just want to speak to someone. We just want to know if they're falling in love. That's all. We're not trying to be weird. We just want to know if they ever fall in love. And I remember the person on the other line was like, "What? What is going on?" Anyway, what we'd actually done is we'd actually rung like a accounting firm in like Singapore. Because we were that drunk that we couldn't find the right number on the phone. So this poor receptionist has got two like drunk lads yelling at her like, "Can we speak to a prostitute? We want to know if she falls in love." And in the morning we remembered that we'd done that, and we're like, "Fucking bloody hell." But out of that, Lady Discover was written, which is about exactly not calling an accounting firm at 2 a.m. You're trying to speak to a lady of the night, but about someone falling in love with someone that they can never have, and knowing there's that sort of worked here, that blockage that you'll never get past. So
It could have been worse. You could have called a church.
Honestly, the fact that we were allowed near phones was probably the first mistake. But when people say how the song's written, sometimes you go, it's very personal, and sometimes you go, wow. So that is the meaning behind Lady Discover.
So you mean to tell me that Lady Discover is pretty much your version of Maggie May?
Yeah. So, and sometimes you play it live, and I remember again talking about playing things live. I've been on stage and gone, "That's right, that was quite funny." Sort of thing. You remember it, and if you can't laugh, you sort of do think it's absurd that. So that's how that song came to be. In many ways, and so some songs are quite fun and daft in how they're written, but for what it's worth, we never got the answer. The accounting firm in Singapore didn't have the answer we're looking for. So I'm still searching to know if anyone wants to leave a comment on the video once it's been uploaded of, is that a thing? Can that happen?
Oh shit!
Try not to leave him out here by himself.
I tried not to. He was out at my door whining, so he must have escaped. I thought you guys left him out.
The door was open when you went
No,
in.
no. I went upstairs when I was asleep. I woke up to him whining outside my bedroom door. He must have escaped.
The door was shut. How did he do it?
I don't know. He was outside my door whining. I don't know how that happened.
Oh, shit. He didn't open the door.
Whatever.
I closed.
Whatever. Guess I'm a liar. But anyway, what were you saying?
Yes, we never found out the answer, but we are looking forward to one day maybe putting that to rest.
Next time, call a bank.
Yeah. It was a very expensive phone call. I remember that, not for me, but for my friend, who probably didn't have to explain to his mum and dad what the charge was. You know, when you used to get the phone bills sent to you in the letter with every call itemized, there would have been quite a long 20-minute phone call in Singapore that would have had to be explained. So,
Wow,
but a song came out of it, so it's all well and good.
that's funny. That's fucking hilarious. But where can we find you at on social media and stuff for those who haven't seen the first episode?
Yeah, so Jimmy Maddon, Maddon, as it's spelled there. Facebook, Instagram, YouTube for my monthly access all areas. Twitter, or X as it's called now. I'll pop up there. Pretty much anywhere that you should be able to find someone who loves themselves far too much and posts too many photos that they've taken of their own face. So find me anywhere: Spotify, Deezer, any good music shop as well, online music shop as well, and general radio stations. Bits and play around the traps.
Well, but I hate to do this, but I'm gonna get off of here. But let's do this again soon.
Yes,
Don't wait.
please.
Don't wait 2 years.
No, I won't. I'll be back before you know it.
I love you, brother, and please stay in touch.
Will do. Hare Krishna. Thank you so much for having me on.
Live long, rock hard, brother.
Cheers.